Welcome back. Social Studies in Isolation Day 2 here. Wanted to kind of stay a little bit on topic with what's going on in the world today. So today's topics are still kind of economics related, but still things that I'm sure lots of people are hearing about. So those of you that are kind of sitting at home with not much to do, maybe you'd be interested. But today we're going to talk about two big things. We're going to talk about unemployment and we're going to talk about inflation. Both of these are not really kind of words that you want to hear a lot, but we'll kind of talk about what are they, what do they mean, and then what's going on in the world today with these two different numbers. So let's start out with unemployment. So what does unemployment mean? You hear about it. Some people have very negative connotations about people that are unemployed. What does it actually mean? So what you need to understand are some of the terms that fall into it. So the unemployment rate is something you hear about a lot, is the number of people that are unemployed divided by the labor force. Now, the labor force only includes people that are available to work, people that are willing to work, and people that are actually looking for work. So if you are a 10-year-old student or even a 16, 17-year-old student, if you're not looking for a job, if you're a full-time student, you don't count in the labor force. If you are 70 years old and you are retired and not looking for a job, you also don't count in the labor force. You have to be available to work, willing to work, and looking for work. So to get the unemployment rate, then, we take the number of people that don't have jobs that fit those criteria divided by the labor force. So some people think anybody that doesn't have a job is unemployed. Well, not according to the definition. They have to be available, willing, and looking. So if somebody is, let's say, staying at home and they don't necessarily have a job, they're taking care of the kids, which is obviously very important. They're not looking for work, so they're not going to count towards this number. If we actually used everybody that didn't have a job, it would be a huge number. So instead, we only count the people that are actually looking for jobs. So what is acceptable unemployment? Well, most economists will agree that kind of an ideal unemployment rate is from 3.5% to 4.5%. We don't want it to be a whole lot higher than that, but we also don't necessarily want it to be nothing. Zero unemployment, people are like, oh, what if everybody had a job? Well, it's almost impossible to have zero unemployment. And what that usually means is the economy is basically heating up too much. It's growing too fast, and it's probably going to lead to a recession. Recession referring to a time when things are not good. So in 2008 would be our last recession. Unemployment was as high as 10.2%. So that's not good either. So we want to keep it around 3.5 to 4.5%. So that means 3.5 to 4.5 of the people are going to not have jobs. And we just have to be basically willing to accept that as a fact in our economy. So the second part of this then is inflation. So inflation is talking about kind of the increase of the cost of goods that exist, or basically the decrease in the value of money. So there's a few things that cause inflation. One of them is a demand pull inflation. So as more and more people demand a good, that is going to cause the price to go up. So when the Wii first came out, there was huge demand, and so the price of Wiis went really, really high. The other thing is cost push inflation. So if it costs a lot to make the product, then it's going to push the cost up as well. So maybe I need to make cars and there's a huge shortage of rubber, and so I can't make the tires. So that's going to cause the cost to go up of cars. So that's demand pull and cost push. Inflation generally is going to happen. You're going to see prices go up. If you go to the grocery store, ask your parents what milk used to cost. Ask your grandparents what milk used to cost. Big difference now versus what it was back then. So we accept a certain amount of inflation to take place. The big problems we run into is when we have what's called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is massive increases in prices. This usually happens when the government prints too much money, and because they printed so much money, it's not worth anything. So everybody always says, well, if we need to pay off the debt, why don't we just print $21 trillion? Then we can pay off the debt. Well, if I print $21 trillion, well, now the money's not worth anything. So Germany had a situation like this. They printed a bunch of money, and then it resulted in hyperinflation. Got to the point where money was so worthless that kids were playing with big blocks of money because it had no value. People were taking entire wheelbarrows full of money to go buy just a loaf of bread. So inflation basically means that everything is really, really expensive. So your currency doesn't have enough value. So unemployment and inflation work together kind of like a teeter-totter does. So as if unemployment goes down, we say, okay, that's great. That means more people have jobs. Well, if more people have jobs, unemployment's going down, that means more people have money. So they're spending more money, which means inflation over here is going up. So unemployment's down, inflation is up. Now, inversely, if all of a sudden people don't have jobs, unemployment is going up, they don't have any money, that means they're not spending the money, and so the inflation is going to go down. And so economics becomes a lot of times this balancing act between the two. Now, there's other factors that go into it. You can have high unemployment and high inflation. That's a big mess. But usually the two are going to kind of go hand in hand. So if we say we want to get jobs and we want to have all these things, well, if all this goes down too quickly, people have too much money, then that causes inflation to go up. And so you have kind of a negative side effect there with those two. So how does this relate to what we see in the world today? Well, for those of you that follow the news at all, even talk to your parents, I'm sure you know that there's a big demand for a lot of products at the grocery store. So if there's a big demand, like we've talked about, think about in your head, that's going to cause inflation. So the prices are going to go up. Well, in addition to this right now, we have another problem is we have people laying off in large numbers. So unemployment could also go up. So we are at one of those kind of poor times when we have higher unemployment and we could have higher inflation, which is definitely going to be a negative thing, which is why we end up in kind of like we've talked about, this pandemic leads to economic problems as well. We have the big stock market problems that I talked about in the first video. So ideally, what we want to do then is we want to get money back in people's hands so they can start buying things, so that we can get the economy going, so that we can hire people back. And so that's when we hear in the news of stimulus packages. That's kind of the idea. If we give everybody, let's say, $1,000, they'll go spend that $1,000. That will get the market going again. It will get people back to work and will repair the economy. So that's kind of a very simplified version of unemployment and inflation and how the two can kind of work together with each other. Obviously, there's a lot more involved with this. This is why people get master's degrees in economics. But as far as what you maybe need to know when you hear it in the news, that's what those two things are. Have a great day. Check back later and we'll update you with some more social studies videos.